Hello again, everybody. This is Dicebag, and it's been a while since I've made a video on any of my games. Part of that's because I've been busy with regular work, and another part is just because I've been busy with working on the games. And yes, that's plural, games with an S. There's another one I want to show you after we talk about Domain, the current project. Or at least the one that's already out. Now, as you can see, I did an update before about the second round of decks for Domain, and we've got a little bit of an update on these. As you can see, we've got a few pieces done for them. We've got this set. We'll have our first epic units, as you can see here. And neat thing about epic units, as opposed to other games where they'll have they'll have character cards basically that are kind of hard to rule on, as like you can have different versions of the same character and stuff like that, and they kind of have to, they tend to have very inelegant ways of representing that in the game. We actually are doing it a different way, where each one has a subtitle in addition to their main title. Now, the main title is what is dependent on when you're playing the card and when you're building your deck. So, say for this one, you can have 4 copies of any card with this name, the title, but they can be any combination of subtitles. So you can have 4 Anasha cards, but if we have multiple versions of her, then you can mix and match whatever you want within those 4. And of course, the standard 1 in play at a time is going to be a thing. And by the way, that makes your resource modes even more valuable, because that gives you something to do with them when you can't play them. Now, as you can see, we've also got some things on her. One of the concerns that people have is that basic units are not particularly useful in deck building. Well, I always intended to add some stuff like this, and as you can see, when she destroys another player's territory, you can search your deck for a basic unit, reveal it, and add it to your hand. So that's a little design space with basic units that we can use that goes beyond the regular tokenness of them. You can't really put tokens in your deck in other games, but with basic units you can. And she lets you search your deck for them, and they go to your hand instead of having to go right out and play. It lets you have a little more nuance to the power level of the abilities you have. And it's just a little design space that we can exploit. But this isn't the main thing I want to talk about today. In fact, it's one of the less important things. We actually, since the second big set is going to be 60 cards, and that's a lot of artwork for me to do, it's going to be a long time before I get there, I started working on a small set. This one is going to be 18 cards. We've got 3 for each color, and then 3 more colorless ones. These will be the first colorless ones released. And if you take a look, you can see that these have enemy color resource modes with an additional one that's colorless. So this will give you a little bit more flexibility in your deck building and the strategies you can use. And it'll be a lot faster to bring out. And also, you can see we've got our first example of a rainbow color resource mode. So that should be interesting to see if I actually balance it properly. But besides that, some of the themes we've got here, we've got some of the first mill cards. Here we've got Aggressive Envoy. Whenever he attacks, the defending player scraps the top 7 cards of his or her deck. And of course, when you're starting with a deck of 50 cards, and then you draw 7 for your starting hand, and you use 5 for your starting territories, that's a pretty big chunk of your deck left over that gets hit away every time the envoy attacks. And of course, here's another thing. The Arcane Institute is an example of a construction, which is basically like equipment, but for territories. So this pretty much represents like a blueprint for something that you can build. And then, of course, the cost represents you actually building the structure on the territory. And this is a little bit of a draw enabler. Not a draw enabler. Well, yes, a draw enabler, but also a mill enabler. It's basically a howling mine that also gives your territory a boost. So at the beginning of each player's end step, that player draws a card. That's what you get when it's attached to a territory. And so that makes the opponent run through their cards faster and gives you more resources. Then we got Shattering Residence. It's a basic artifact removal spell, because basically we needed more artifact removal. I think there's only one in the game right now, and that's an oversight. That's definitely not what I should have done. We need more of that, so I added it to this next set. Then we got Infantry Recruiter, our black-white one. And black-white is going to be a very basic unit enabling color combination. Basically, it's the idea of mass production is what black-white represents. So this guy is another one that will let you search your deck. Oh, no, wait. At the beginning of your end step, look at the top card of your deck. If that card's basic unit, you may reveal it and add it to your hand. So that one, it's a consistent engine, not a one-time thing. But yeah, that's another way that we can use basic units in the deck to provide an advantage, even though they're typically weaker than other cards. And then Toll Road. Let's see, whenever another player plays a non-resource card, that player scraps the top 3 cards of his or her deck unless that player pays 1. So that is another mill enabler, or a way to kind of slow down your opponent. Kind of depends on them. And it's a territory, so that means your opponent will have to destroy it in order for you to win. Venom Farmer, a basic elf unit, wanted to represent the black and green style of elves, and he's a guy to give deadly to your other units whenever you want. Then we got Field Forge, a small territory, the smallest one I've got, basically an impromptu forge is the flavor behind it. When you deploy it, you add 3 red supplies to your stock, and that's our white-red one. Galvanic Hunter, this is just a nice, efficient unit for aggressive decks. He's got initiative, he's got ranged, he's got charge. This unit deals 1 damage unit to the defending target. Damage to the target. This unit deals 1 damage to target unit the defending player controls. And of course, that's a pretty push card. That's why it's got a colorless resource there. You can't fit too many of those in your deck, or you won't be able to play anything. Mass Subversion. This is I think our last mill enabler card. Target player discards 2 cards and scraps the top 3 cards of his or her deck. Now, if you'll notice, the mill specific cards, we've got Arcane Institute on turn 1, Toll Road on turn 2, Mass Subversion on turn 3, and then Aggressive Envoy on turn 4. You can basically build a deck around that and have a decent curve. That's what was the intention behind that. But then, of course, you also got to attach this at some point or it won't do anything. But, no game plays out exactly as you want it. On the other hand, we've got our green cards. This is just a basic big beater, 4/5 with trample with 4/4 supplies, and this is basically representing the earth element. I wanted to kind of give a little more meat to the elemental subtypes in this one, so here this shows that earth is both green and black, and also I think red. I think I include red as an earth color. But that's not in here yet. Then Hurricane Blast is another kind of that example. It's a board wipe for flying units. And of course it's water and wind, which is two elements that blue and green share. An Ocean Reach Exile, an Elf Explorer. This is a way to kind of explore the design territory of the face-down territories. So when he comes into play, you take the top card of your deck and you put it face down as a new territory. So he's kind of a guy that goes out and explores new things and founds new territories for you. Then we got Deep-Hold Forge Walkers. A basic dwarf. I needed a dwarf. I always forget to add dwarves to my things. But yeah, here he is. He's kind of a counterpart to the Confederate Frostbringers. And that he's a fire guy. He's got white and red rather than white and blue. And you can spend some supplies and tap him to deal 1 damage to a unit or territory. And next up we got Syndicate Necromancer. 3 supplies, a 1/2, and he just lets you recur a unit card from your scrapyard. And he's your black and white guy. This, of course, showing that black does not really have a monopoly on necromancy. White can definitely use it, and in the future you might see a lot of white using it. And then we've got Training Hall. This is another construction like Arcane Institute over here. And this one basically is an Anthem effect. It has the same bonus to the territory, but it also has units you control get +1/+0. So that's a nice thing for small aggro decks that go wide. And of course, let's get to our rainbow guy. We got the Astral Shard for 2 supplies. And it's a little bit of a ramp. You can expend it to add a colorless supply to your stock. Or you can spend 2 and expend it and sacrifice it then to draw 2 cards. But in its resource mode, let's take a look. When it comes out, each other player draws a card. But you notice it doesn't come into play expended. So it won't slow you down, but it will help out your opponent a little bit. And I think that's a pretty significant drawback for such a good effect. And we have to keep that in mind that there's not really a limit to the amount of rainbow cards you could put in a deck, unlike the colorless ones. On colorless ones, there's pretty much a hard limit, because if you fill your deck too much, then you're just not going to be able to pay any costs that require colored supplies. So that's something I really want to keep in check, and I think I've done a pretty decent job on that one. Anyways, Militia Encampment. This is another colorless one, a territory. And it's another basic unit enabler. This one lets you search your tech for 2 basic units. And it also boosts basic units by +1 size. +0/+1 in other words. And last but not least, we have Sovereign Fortress. This is a castle. It's got 6 size. So it's going to be a beast to take down. That's why it's a fortress. That's why it costs 6. And also, when a unit defends this territory, that unit gets +0/+1 until end of turn. So it makes it harder for your guys to get taken down while they're defending, and he's hard to beat down anyways. So there we go. That's what we have here. But that's not all we have. There is another game I've been working on the side, in the background. And if you're following me on Parler, where I'm mostly active, then you've probably seen it already. That would be this right here. Get out of here. Let me introduce you to Crystal Creatures, working title. This is basically tabletop Pokemon. It's a tabletop RPG. Well, let's just go through the core concept. A tabletop role-playing game that emulates the collecting, training, and battling aspects of monster collecting games, and combines it with more traditional player character creation and user-generated adventures, as is typical for a tabletop role-playing game. Now I want to make it unique from Pokemon, obviously, so we're setting this in a fantasy world, unlike the sci-fi-ish version of Pokemon, and is filled with dangerous magical beasts. Old practices of magic has been lost to time, but the art of binding magical creatures into crystals has recently been rediscovered. And as you can see, this guy's got a little crystal in his hand. If I can zoom in there, then you'd see that there is a little creature in there as well. And then there's this little guy here. We call him Gumbo. Anyways, conjurers are in high demand around the world as modern people seek to rediscover the lost magic of ancient civilizations. And a little blurb about how conjured creatures work. While captured creatures are crystallized, that's a lot of alliteration right there, they reside in a pocket dimension on the astral plane. Each conjurer's astral pocket is different and can be altered while they sleep, like a dream world. So basically, when they're crystallized, we don't have any of those questions about what happens to the Pokemon when it's in the Pokeball. Well, it's basically living in your dream world for crystal creatures. And of course, that means when you're dreaming, I suspect I'll have it so any kind of conjurer is basically a default lucid dreamer. So you can play around and with your little monsters while you're sleeping and stuff like that. Nice little flavorful things that make the world a little unique. Now let's talk about the features. This first one, I haven't been able to find a way to do yet. Some kind of enforced scarcity to enable collectability. That's probably not going to be feasible with this kind of game because it's so user-generated. So basically, people house rule things all the time in these kinds of games, and it's probably not really feasible to have like almost like a secondary market kind of stranglehold on scarcity to that extent. But it's something I want to keep in mind just in case I have an epiphany or something. Beyond that, next up is we have turn-based tactical combat with a focus on resource management. Now, if you are familiar with my tastes in games, you know that turn-based tactical combat is basically where I'm at. That's my main jam. And then resource management, that just kind of goes along with it. And I'll talk about the resources a little later. And character progression, that goes wide rather than tall. So in other words, we're not having tens and hundreds of levels with your stats going up, going up, going up, going up. We're just going to have a few levels, but they can be spread out over a number of things. And I'll talk more about that when I show you some of the creatures. And of course, last feature we have defined is non-combat applications for each creature. So we don't want them to just be numbers on a grid. I want each thing to have its role in the world, being able to help you out on your adventure, not just whenever you get ambushed by wild creatures or whatever. So I try to make sure each creature has some kind of niche that helps you in exploring or interacting with the world around you. And I think that'll be really fun for people to deal with. And also, it just it takes the focus off of the player and onto the creatures that they have, which is kind of something I want to maintain. Also, a little aside, one thing I noticed about Pokemon games like that, this is basically the non-combat applications. That is our way of handling things like HMs. And the thing about Pokemon, when you have HMs, the worst part is that they kind of have to take up slots for your combat powers. And in this one, we don't. But On the other hand, there's another way that I've seen it done in a game called Tim Tim, which I probably should do some videos on sometime because I played quite a bit of it and it's pretty fun. But one of the flaws is that instead of having HMs, they just give you like items to traverse the obstacles that they put in your way, which is kind of like not fun, to put it bluntly. The basic gist is that just there's an obstacle in your way and you can't do it, you can't get through it until somebody gives you an item to get through it. And then when you have the item, you can just get through it whenever you want. It doesn't really impact the gameplay. It's just a way to put roadblocks in your way, to put barriers between you and content that they don't want you to see yet. And that's really boring, and that kind of made me think, maybe HMs aren't such a bad idea, because they actually interact with the other parts of the game. You have to have something with you that can get through the obstacles, and that takes a spot in your roster, and that kind of has an impact on the rest of the game. It's a little bit of resource management going on there. So I'm kind of trying to keep that aspect of it where you need to have your creatures, or you need to have creatures that can help you out outside of combat, but you're not sacrificing their combat ability. That's the basic gist behind that. Anyways, onto the resource management. Now, health, used to manage strenuous activity outside of combat. This is basically my way of just putting caps on that out of combat things you can do, because there's a lot of like crafting and profession stuff that I'm trying to squeeze into the game, and I just want to make sure that we have a system in place to kind of make it concrete. So basically, when you do work, each hour is going to use up like 5 health. And of course, food restores health out of combat, so you can have a meal, you get your health back, and that's how things are going to be kind of restricted when you're not in a strict adventure setting. So if you're creating items on the fly when you're out in the wild, or if you're just sitting at home in your downtime, you can kind of plan things out in a very concrete way. Anyways, you've also got mana, used to activate artifacts and craft magic items. So mana is another thing that limits your ability to craft, but also one of the things we have going on with the artifacts in the game is that they take mana to activate. So you're usually not going to be directly casting spells, for example. What you will do is you'll have items that can have impacts on the games, kind of like the non-combat applications for creatures, but they're going to tend to be less combat focused and more about interacting with the world and getting around obstacles and things like that. Things that you can kind of turn into a gimmick for a campaign. And using those is going to, cost your mana. And then, of course, each monster has mana. They have a lot less than humans. And when they use their mana, you're going to have to replenish that from your own reserves. Unless you all take a long rest. Now, let's see. Sleeping restores 1/4 of a character's maximum mana every 2 hours. And that goes for creatures too. And that's what I was just saying. Conjurer can transfer 1 mana to a creature with a major action. We have 2 actions every turn is the way I'm handling it right now. A major and a minor. So major is like your regular attacks. Minor would be moving or using support abilities, things like that. It just depends on, what powers you have available to you. And then the combat mechanics. What we're doing with this is a D10 style system here rather than a d20. So this is kind of along the lines of Vampire the Masquerade and things like that. So when you're attacking, you'll roll a number of d10s equal to the power's attack dice, and then each roll that meets or exceeds the defense stat that it's targeting counts as a hit, and damage dealt is based on the attack stat times the number of hits. And then you get additional effects on 10s for some powers, and then sometimes you might have artifacts that can let you do extra things in combat. Now, we just get a list of status effects here. That's pretty much the basic rundown of how this game works. So, without further ado, here's the part people are excited to see, I'm sure. The creatures! Yay! Now, in typical Pokemon-ish fashion, we've got our 3 starter types here. We've got Glubble. He's a grumpy bubble, as you can see. He ain't too happy to be here, but here he is. Oh well. Now this guy's kind of he's fairly tough. He's kind of middle range in most of those stats, but you can see he has 3 classes listed here. Now the way we do classes here, each one has 5 levels, and each level of the different classes grants him different abilities. And of course he can take any levels from these because they're all bought by a experience point system. It's not a thing where you just gain a certain amount of experience and then you gain a level. You actually spend the experience to buy levels in certain things. So he might start out with 1 rank in fluid, and then when he gets a certain amount of experience, he might buy another first rank in pressurized, and then after a while he might get a 2nd rank in fluid, and they all have their own costs associated with them. So let's take a look at what we've got for the classes. Each level grants them different abilities, basically. At level 1, they basically get their 2 starting powers that are kind of unique to their class. And then they also get kind of just a general boost. And they also get a general boost every odd level. And then once you get to level 2, they gain like this disturbing aura ability here. It's basically just a constant thing that impacts the way the creature plays on the battlefield. So that's going to impact the kind of strategies you're going to look for and the way they actually handle themselves in combat. So you can see here, this is the anomaly class, and it's got disturbing aura. So enemies adjacent to the creature get -1 deflection and evasion, and that's your defense stats. So an anomaly is creepy to be around, and it makes you shaky and it makes you easy to miss attacks coming at you. That's the basic gist. So when you're using an anomaly class creature, you're going to want to get it into melee with your enemies so everybody else can have an easier time hitting them. So that kind of affects how they're played. And then we also have, at levels 3 and 4, they get extra powers that are just taken from a general pool of powers of their certain types. Oh, I should also mention the kinds of types. Oh, well, I don't want to bring it all up, but we've got like something like 16 or 17, I think. They're a little more fantasy-ish than what you would get out of Pokemon. As you can see, we've got the Aberrant class, which is kind of taken after aberrations in D&D, and you'll see some of them that kind of look along those lines as I show you more creatures. We've got beasts, that's kind of the analog to normal type. So it's not just, oh, this is a type list kind of thing. It's like it's an actual type. Of course, those are modeled after specific types of animals. We've got bird, cat, and rodent here. And those are kind of things that I can plug in to things that I'm not really sure what other kinds of abilities I should give them. So it's kind of a filler, but it'll work, I'm sure. Then there's also constructs is another thing that's doesn't really have an analog in other types of games. Obviously, these are things that are created, creatures that are created through like artifice and stuff like that. So you've got your golem class, you got your juggernaut class. I think that's all I've got right now. Then fairy, that's typical stuff. Fire, yeah. Martial, that's our analog to fighting. Then plant, obviously that's grass. Poison, self-explanatory. Psionic is our psychic, of course. We're using more, tabletop roleplay type of lingo. And then we got Sonic, which is something I thought should have existed for a long time in these types of games, but I never see it get brought up. Pokemon has all kinds of like sound-based attacks, but they don't have a Sonic type for whatever reason. I don't know. But then we've also got Undead. I think this is the last one that's kind of out of the ordinary. And it's basically, compared to Pokemon, it's basically a combination of dark and ghost. That's the basic gist of it. And now let's just go back to the creatures. Of course, we got little middle evolution for Global there, and here he is all grown up. This is Globbernaut. He's kind of the tank of the starters, quote unquote. Next up is Flowezy. This is our plant starter. He's a lousy flower. That's why it's called Flowezy. But look, he grows up into a dinosaur, specifically based on the Dilophosaur from Jurassic Park. And I know, that's not an accurate representation of a Dilophosaur, but it is a cool representation, and that's what we want. Then we've got Torkish, our fire guy. I don't have all of his evolutions drawn up yet, but I've got ideas. I've at least got names. Next one's going to be Tikish. There's the same picker. Then we got Tortiki, which is, I've actually got sketched out, but I haven't finished the drawing yet. Next up, we've got Cheapy. Cute little zombie, because he's undead. A zombie chick. He's a creepy chick, basically, is where you get the name. And Befoul, little play on words there. Not my most favorite design, but when is the middle evolution actually ever that good? And Roosturge. I'm pretty happy with this name. Kind of proud of myself. Oh, I should also point out, they've got their little abilities right here. And components. That's stuff that you're going to use for crafting. So these are kind of the things that you get for defeating them. Of course, you have to make a roll to collect the components, and that depends on some of your skills as a character. And the more high rolls you get, the more components you can harvest from defeated creatures and stuff like that. Also, I think just having creatures is going to net you some amount of essences. Maybe like one per day or something like that you can just collect from them. You pluck his feathers a little bit and you can get essences out of that. That kind of stuff. And then we got Arbo. This is our martial guy. He's a climber, so he can scale things without having to check on anything. He can crawl up a tree whenever he wants and just jump on top of people, whatever. And of course, see, we got the beast thing in here. He's a rodent, so we can just kind of use that as a filler. And Syndicate is our psionic guy. And now you might notice, if you look at the resistance and vulnerabilities, that Cheapy, Arbo, and Syndicate actually form a kind of secondary starter trio. And that one, they have a rock, paper, scissors relationship. In other words, since Cheapy is undead and basically a zombie, he is resistant to psionic attacks because they attack your brain. And he ain't got no brain. Or at least that's kind of the flavor behind it. And then, of course, he is vulnerable to Arbo because he can just beat the crap out of him. But Arbo is vulnerable to Syndicate because he's, brawn over brains. Next up, Clayman. Yeah, this is our first construct. It's a little throwback to the Neverhood if you take a good look at the design. So, when I'm working on, or when I'm trying to figure out how constructs work kind of in the world, I'm figuring that most of them are basically going to be just constructed by the actual people, but they'll also be kind of strolling around the ancient ruins of dead civilizations that you have to explore and stuff like that. So I'm gonna make it so people can actually make their own constructs like this if they can find like recipes and stuff like that. So that's a little fun thing I think we'll add to crafting. And as I expand the game, I intend to introduce kind of like breeding type of rules, and that will be the way constructs interact with that type of system. Whatever it ends up being, is that you'll be able to make the modifications related to breeding in your creation of a new construct. Now, next up, Florib, our first aberrant type. Now, you might notice what he is based after. Obviously, he looks kind of like a beholder. A little beholder. Just a little guy. But he grows up into Zorb. Yeah, great names, I know. But obviously, these guys can float around. That makes them get to places that you couldn't normally get to. So that's very helpful in your adventure, I'm sure. Here's the little guy I almost didn't even make. But it kind of came to me from an earlier one. Actually, you might remember this guy from the first page I was showing. This is Gumbo. He's a little flying elephant. A little flying pink elephant with butterfly wings for ears. Yeah. I don't know why. I don't know why, but that came to me and I thought it was freaking genius. Maybe it is. I don't know. But I like it. I like Gumbo. He's one of my favorite designs. But it also occurred to me that I couldn't really think of like an evolution for him. So I thought, what if he was the final evolution? And that gave me a little bit of room to create one of these kind of low-level monsters in the game. Like your Caterpies and your Weedles and stuff like that. So since he's kind of got a butterfly theme going on, we'll make him the little bug monster of this game. At least to start with. So he starts out as a gum pillar. And he can climb. He is like Arbo. He can climb vertical surfaces because he got sticky feet. And then he turns into a gum pod. Metapod. But with an elephant nose. And last but not least, Gumbo And of course, Gumbo and Gumpod can both levitate. They don't really need the climber ability when they can levitate. And now we're getting into some weird ones that I haven't really developed fully. I'm not sure if I'm going to keep Momi's name, but the idea with this guy, see, he's got a big leaf head. He's got a little leaf on the back. Now the idea is that through his evolution stages, that little leaf is going to grow into a second head. And he's going to evolve into something called a timber. Wonderful name. Genius, I know. Basically an Etten, but as a tree with a leaf head. I haven't drawn him yet. We're still working on this. Then we got Nim Pup. Just a cutesy design I came up with. I thought, I don't know. How do you even explain your inspiration for these things? It's a dog. I drew it. I made it like goofy and weird. I don't know. Anyways, he's a celestial. I forgot about this. Celestial is another one that's doesn't really have an analog to other games. So I'm not really sure what to say about it. I think it's pretty self-explanatory. Yeah, I don't know. He's got stars. He's celestial. He shoots lasers. That kind of stuff. And then this is the only dual type one I have at the moment. This is Ragastuffin. He's a construct undead type. So, he's basically a voodoo doll, kinda. For lack of a better term. Well, no, maybe not a voodoo doll. He's actually kind of modeled after a scarecrow. But yeah, he's not that big. So this is the kind of thing you'll be able to make one. I figure these are the kind of things that are kind of like made very commonly. They're kind of lower powered guys. Farmers might keep some of them to keep other creatures out of their fields, munching on their food, stuff like that. He'll have a place in the world. I don't know what kind of abilities to give this guy though, so that's something else I'll have to think about. And then, well, that's it. That's all there is here. Now, I guess I should talk about the actual character things going on with your player characters. I don't really have it all hashed out, but basically the talents are what you're going to use most. These are your what's the word I'm looking for? Like your inherent abilities. You got fitness, intellect, sense, and that kind of. It's very simple, but fitness, just your physical fitness, intellect, your mental abilities, and sense is just kind of your awareness and your ability to understand things that are going on. So that can relate to basically your ability to observe things and also your ability to sense things in other people. It's a social thing more so than the intellect. So that's going to be mainly what the player characters are going to be on. And right now I've got it so that they can have various skills that are basically in the same vein as the classes as they're bought level by level. But I'm not sure exactly how I'm going to make that play out in the final version. I might actually replace that with just general classes like professions for players, but I'm not exactly sure how that's going to interact with like the crafting skills, because I've spent a lot of time fleshing out the crafting skills and I'm not going to abandon those. So I got to find a way to fit them into that system in a way that feels good. So hopefully in the near future, I will be able to get a little group together and do some playtesting with these. And I did some figuring out of, what is it, like Roll20, the website that lets you play these games over like the internet and stuff like that. So hopefully we'll be able to do that remotely with a group and record it and have that to show off on my channel with luck, if we can get enough people. So that's, hell, I'll just go ahead and say it. If you're interested in playtesting this game with me, tell me. I'll think about it. I'm trying to keep it like to close people I actually know, but I'm not sure if they'll all be interested in doing this kind of thing. So let me know. Anyways, that's all I've got. This has probably been a very long video. Oh man, it's like 45 minutes. Wow. Didn't mean to go on and ramble for this long, but I got to talking and I just couldn't stop. And here I was afraid that I wouldn't be able to fill time. But, you know, when you like what you're talking about, it's easy to get lost. So, thanks for watching, especially for this long of a video. I hope it wasn't boring. And I'll see you guys later.